Hi, I'm Nick Cooper and welcome to the Boss DR5 video manual. Okay, the purpose of this video is to show you everything you need to know about getting up and running with the DR5. As you will notice, the video is actually shot in sections, each section relating to a specific operation of the unit. Okay, so if at any time you want to stop the tape and go over something we've been talking about, or even try things out for yourself, I think that would be a great idea. Now, some of you may have used drum machines in the past. Well, if that's the case, then you're going to be familiar with the layout of the DR5 already. But I'll assume that you haven't, and we'll actually take it from first principles. Okay, so first and foremost, we'll take a look at the actual layout of the unit. But I'm going to get rid of this before we begin. Okay, so here's the basic unit. Now, I like to break the front panel of the DR5 down into 4 sections. As you can see here, on the top we have a rather large LCD display. Okay, there's not much to see there at the moment, but once we power up it will come alive with information. To the right-hand side we have the data dial. Now this is actually used for changing parameter values and also for changing the tempo of the music that we're listening to in real time. Okay, just next to these we can see the cursor controls. Now this is cursor left and cursor right, and these enable us to get around the various menus and the display of the DR5. Coming down to this section here, we can see the traditional drum machine pad style layout. Okay, so we can enter the drums in the usual way. Not only that, but as you obviously know already, the DR5 allows you to record a bass pattern and a rhythm pattern in conjunction with the usual drum patterns. So we use these pads for entering melody lines and chords as well. Not only that, but in conjunction with the shift button just here, we can actually use the pads to access some of the DR5's editing functions. As you can see, along the top of each pad, in blue, there are some extra functions associated. Okay, finally, in this section here, we have what are effectively the tape recorder transport controls, things like start, stop, and record, obviously. Okay, so that's the basic layout of the front panel. Let's take a quick look on the rear just to see what connections we can make. Starting over on this side, we see the battery compartment. Okay, great idea, battery-powered unit, great busking tool. But if you want to use it with a power supply, there's actually an AC adapter input here. Now, be very careful if you intend to use an external power supply unit. You've got to use the right type, and only the Boss PSA adapter will do. Try using anything else and you're likely to damage the unit. In between here we have the power on and off switch. Okay, moving along, MIDI in and MIDI out. Okay, we'll talk about their function a little bit later on. Next comes the foot switch jack input. Again, this is probably one of the most useful functions we can find on a drum machine. Starting and stopping from a foot switch being the most obvious application, but there's an awful lot more you can do with that, and again we'll talk about that later on. Next along we have the guitar input jack. Guitar input, what's that for? Well, a couple of very, very unique features in the DR5 which we'll look at in depth. Next along we have the input volume control for the guitar. And finally on the end we have the stereo output jacks, left and right. Okay, what about amplification? Well, I think it's very important to use the right kind of amplification. We're basically looking at something like a PA or a hi-fi or even a keyboard combo. Any amplifier that gives a flat frequency response, a guitar amplifier is not suitable as they tend not to have a full range output. Okay, so that's worth bearing in mind. Finally, on the side of the unit we have the master volume control and a headphone output jack. Okay, so that's the unit, that's everything we need to look at. Okay, so now we know what all the buttons do and we know what the various connectors on the back are for. Let's turn the power on. Right, well the first thing you'll notice is the unit takes about 5 or 6 seconds to go through its power-up routine. This is just a basic initialization that most electronic units of this kind perform. Now, one trick at this stage, before we do anything else, I think it's very, very useful to know how to initialize a product of this kind. This will ensure that everything is set back to where it was when you actually got the unit out of the box. Now the way you do this on the DR5 is to turn the power off again, hold down the two fret buttons as you see there on the bottom of the unit, hold them both down together while turning the power on. And you can see straight away that the LCD display shows system init, so it's asking me whether I want to initialize the system. Now I'm not going to hit the enter button because I've actually got some work in here that I want to keep. So here's a word of caution. The system initialization procedure will erase any user work that's in the unit. Okay, so bear that in mind. I'm actually going to hit the exit button now, and it'll run straight back through to its power-up routine. And brings me straight into song mode. Okay, so song mode is the first mode we enter after power-up. Just a quick word about modes. You can see along the top row of the pads on the DR5, we have song, pattern, pad, MIDI, and utilities, basically. I can access these different modes by holding down the Shift Erase button, then pressing the relevant pad. So, okay, we're in song mode, and I know we're in song mode because at the top of the display here we see, in the mode window, song is actually printed. If I was to change to pattern mode, you can see that the display actually changes to pattern. Let's go back to song mode. Using the data dial, we can rotate and select one of 20 songs. Now at the moment in my machine there is only one song, and that's number 20, and that happens to be the demo song. So select the demo song using the dial and you should see the name Circus appear in the display. Now that's actually the name of the song. And we're ready to have a listen to the demonstration. Take some time to listen to this because it's a good way to hear the quality of the sounds, and if you fancy it you can actually skip to various parts within the song using these two buttons down here, forward and backward. If you watch the display as I hit these buttons, you can see that the numbers up here are changing. Now this represents the part, if you like, of the song, and each part consists of a different pattern and various other bits of information that we're going to look into later. So try starting the song. Okay, I can stop that there and I can use my forward and backward keys, and I can go from part number 7, for example. Different part of the demo. Okay, so that's the demo tune. I'll let you listen to that in your own time. Okay, so much for the ROM demonstration. Now, to create a song on the DR5, as with many other drum machines, you need to actually chain together a series of patterns. Now, the DR5 gives you 200 factory preset patterns, as well as 200 memories for your own patterns. So let's first go into pattern mode and have a listen to some of the presets that Boss have given us. Once again, changing the modes is simply a matter of holding down the Shift Erase button and selecting PTN for pattern. And as you can see there, the mode display at the top of the unit actually shows us that we're in pattern mode. Now, just here I have my pattern number flashing, and using the data dial I can actually increase or decrease the pattern number, and you can see there that the pattern names are appearing underneath the number as it changes. I can take it all the way up to 200, and then you see the pattern name disappears, so we're actually in blank memory territory here. Well, let's go back. Let's pick a couple of my favourite patterns, give you an idea of what they sound like. There's a good one. Okay, now what's happened? The pattern number itself has stopped flashing, which shows that we're actually playing pattern number 92. But over here, we have another number which is flashing now. Just above this number, you may be able to see next pattern. What this is telling me is basically I can select the next pattern that's going to be played using the alpha dial, for example, scroll to pattern 93. This is still flashing. What it means is that when the previous pattern has come to an end, it will then move on swiftly to the next pattern number. So this is great. It allows for seamless joins and logical joins. So that's how you listen to the 200 factory preset patterns. Now you'll notice that all of the patterns tend to play at the same tempo. Well, there is a global tempo control when in this mode. Now the tempo of the pattern is actually shown in the bottom left-hand corner of the display here. Tempo 128. Now if you want to change the tempo, simply a matter of holding down the tempo button over here. The display changes and reads tempo crotchet equals 128. Again, using the data dial, I can change that to any value I want. Hit exit and I'll go back to the name of the pattern. Hit start and we have the same pattern playing at a different tempo. Okay, so moving on. Now you may have noticed while I was scrolling through the various patterns that they tend to be grouped. Let me show you what I mean. Here is pattern 88 and the name is House 11. Go to 89, House 12, House 13 and House 14. Well, what this means is that there is an original pattern, House 11, and the three patterns that come afterwards are related to the original. Now you can actually access these variation patterns by using the forward and backward buttons here. You see written underneath the buttons are actually FTO and FTV. FTO stands for fill to original, FTV stands for fill to variation. So let's just set pattern 88 running and I'll show you exactly what they do. Okay, that's the original pattern playing. If I hit fill to variation, the original pattern will play up to the end of the pattern and then move on to the fill pattern. Which it does now. Then I can set up fill to original. Again, it will wait until finishing the previous pattern before moving on to that. Which it does now. Okay, so there you see how you can actually put the patterns together in real time. Now these functions can actually be assigned to the foot switch, so there's no need to actually use the front panel controls at all. But we'll look at the foot switch assignment later on. Now you may feel when listening to the patterns that you want to break them down and actually hear the individual instruments playing on their own. Well, there's a facility called Mute, which allows you to do exactly this. And you'll find it in the utility mode. So let's pick a pattern, pattern 92. Shift Erase Utility. And you can see there's one of the first utility functions flashing. We're going to use the cursor controls and we're going to move along to the right. And you can see at the top of the display there, Mute. T1, track 1, is flashing and it says that the mute is off. Now if I turn mute to on, it basically means that track 1 will no longer be heard. Okay, so let's do that. Let's turn track 1 mute on. Go back using the cursor controls, change T1 to T2. And again, using the cursor to the right, turn the mute on for that particular track. And once more for track 3. So what we've done is we've muted tracks 1, 2 and 3, leaving just the drums. So let's go back to pattern mode and have a listen to our pattern. Just the drums. Well, that's pretty handy when it comes to actually hearing what's going on. And if you wish to use parts of a preset pattern, maybe edit them, turn them into something of your own creation, that's a good way to start. Now, the patterns, although beautifully programmed, aren't necessarily going to suit your needs. There's often a time where I find a pattern that's pretty close to what I want, but it's, for example, in the wrong key, or has a sound that I want to change. Well, let's assume that we've taken pattern 36. Okay, pretty much what we're after, but we need to change it. I want to transpose the whole pattern up 3 semitones, for example. We need to perform an edit. Now, a very important point here, the preset patterns themselves cannot be changed. They are not editable. For obvious reasons, really. We want to know where we're going from, and it's always good to have those patterns stored in the machine. What we can do is copy the pattern over into a user memory location. Once it's there, you can change it, edit it to your heart's content. So the first thing we're going to do is copy the pattern. And to do this, we use the Shift Erase button again, and we find the pad marked copy. Shift Erase, copy. The display asks me if I want to copy, question mark, to pattern location 236. Well, that's exactly what I want to do, so I hit the Enter button. It says overwrite. Well, that's because there's something else already in 236. Hit again, and it says done. So let's actually scroll through now and have a look at 236 and see what's there. Okay, there we go. The same name appears as in the original. So there's the original. Okay, once that's there, we can now change it. Now I'm going to use the transpose facility. So again, I find the pad marked trans, for transpose, Shift Erase, trans. And here I have the opportunity to actually transpose each of the 3 musical parts separately. So I'm actually going to perform the edit 3 times, 1 for each track. Select track 1, transpose up by 3 semitones. I hit enter, and it asks me if I'm sure. Well, I am sure, so I hit enter again. Okay, so track 1 is now transposed. Well, the whole thing is going to be very out of tune at this point. So I go to transpose again, select track 2, select the amount, 3 semitones, enter, sure, enter. And one more time, transpose track 3, set the amount to 3 semitones, enter twice. Now let's listen to the pattern and see what's happened. Great, that's exactly what we were after. So that's how to perform the edit. Now, the name still says Rock Plus One. Well, I've actually changed it. I've created my own pattern effectively. So the next thing I want to do is actually name the pattern. It's customized, so I'm going to give it a customized name. Using the cursor controls, I can scroll all the way along, and I'll eventually come to PTN NAM, pattern name. Okay, we have to shorten these words sometimes. But you'll see the R of rock is now flashing. Well, I can use the tempo data dial to actually change the letter seen there. Or what shall I call it? I'm going to call it Nick 1. Okay. Let's move that to there. There we have Nick 1. Okay. Now there's no need to enter that name. That will be remembered. You could actually turn the power off of the DR5, and that pattern name, together with all the pattern information, will be stored in the machine and retained forever. So let's go back to our pattern name display, and there we have it. Well, once the pattern's in, you can decide whether you want to use it or not. Supposing you'd created a pattern, you'd customized it, and you'd made the wrong edits or done something you didn't want to do. Well, what we can do is we can simply erase the pattern from memory using the erase feature. Now, it's actually called delete on the front panel. So what we do, select the pattern you wish to erase, Shift Erase, and hit the delete button. And it will say pattern clear, all flashes. Well, the reason for that is that we could actually choose, if we wanted to, simply to clear a particular track of the pattern. But I'm going to select all, and I'm going to hit enter. Are you sure? Inevitably done. Now, although the pattern is now clear, the name remains, which is quite nice really, because it would be a pain if I had to go back and rewrite the name every time I wanted to make a change to a pattern, or indeed erase some of the tracks within it. So the preset patterns are fine, provide an ideal starting place, but eventually you're going to want to create your own patterns from scratch. Now, there are various ways you can do this, but there are 2 things you will have to know before you can actually attempt this. Firstly, how to actually use the data entry pads on the unit itself, and secondly, how to set up the sounds that you're going to use. So our next section is going to be how to use the keypads. So we've decided to create our own pattern from scratch. Well, the first thing we're going to need to do now is learn how to use the keypads. Now, obviously for drums, it's a very straightforward matter. How do you select the track that you're going to be entering now? This is the first thing to consider. If you select a pattern, obviously the pattern has used 3 sounds and a drum kit in its creation. If I select a pattern, for example, pattern 92, I can play that. And I can listen to the constituent tracks by using the track select button just down here. Now, if I hit this a couple of times, you may see that over here in the track select window, the actual track 1, 2, 3 and drum appear. So I can actually set it to drums and have a listen to my drum kit. Okay? I can change the drum sounds I'm using, and I'll show you how to do that later on. Hit track 1 and I've got a piano sound, okay? Because that was the initial sound that was used for track 1. Track 2 is actually the bass, and track 3 is the strings. So I can literally play those sounds directly from the keypads and get them into the DR5's memory. But you may wonder how the pads are actually laid out. Well, it's a very, very clever bit of design here. What Boss have done is actually to represent the guitar fretboard in terms of the layout of the pads. So you can think here, E, A, D, G, B, E. So what we've got is effectively the guitar's neck upside down, which is the way you normally see it anyway if you're sitting above the guitar. So I can think of a chord shape, think about how I would finger that, and literally translate that directly onto the front panel. For example, the D major shape. Just hit the pads exactly as you would strings on the guitar, and away you go. So fantastic idea and a great fast way of getting the data into the machine. Now there's also an alternative way of playing chords on the DR5. There's a little button here. It just says on and off. Well, this turns the chord mode on or off. And as I hit that, as I toggle, you can see that chord appears on the display there. When in chord mode, this is a useful way of entering chords by specifying a tonic note using the bottom 3 rows of the pads and a chord type using the top 3 rows. I'll show you what I mean. Pick a note, F for example. Pick a chord type. Well, what have we got here? I can go for major 7 with an added 9th, for example. Play the 2 together, and that's exactly what I get. Let's try E minor 7. Okay, so very ingenious design. Now, the chords you play are actually shown or reflected in the LCD display in 2 different ways. Let's go back to single note mode for a moment. Now, if I play one of the pads, you can see over here we have a small chord chart display, and a dot appears at the relevant string and fret position corresponding to the note I play. Over here we have a small keyboard display, and again the note I'm playing is blacked out, so I can see exactly what I'm doing at any time. Turn chord mode on again, hold down a tonic note and a chord type, and it's absolutely fab. What we get is the keyboard display of the chord in its correct voicing, and the same with the guitar chord. Okay? This kind of display should be very, very familiar to guitarists using songbooks and so on. So, a great little idea, I think. Now, if you look underneath the pads, you'll see there's another row of buttons. Accent 1, accent 2, fret, tenuto and staccato. Well, let me explain these one at a time. Now, in the middle there we have 2 fret buttons. Well, as you can see, the pads themselves only really cover the first 6 frets of the guitar, so we'd be limited in our range pitch-wise. So what we can do, we can actually use the fret shift buttons to actually shift the range of the pads upwards. So let me just play a couple of notes. Well, there's one. Hit the fret shift button. And as as you can see, it takes us all over the guitar fretboard. The actual fret position is shown just here next to the chord chart. So effectively what this is a capo, and we can actually place the capo at any position we want, covering the whole of the guitar pitch range. Dead handy. Okay, the accent buttons. Well, the pads themselves on the DR5 are not velocity sensitive, and by velocity sensitive I mean they will not respond to the different velocities of your finger. With a velocity sensitive keyboard, if you hit the note harder, the sound comes out louder. Well, that doesn't happen with the DR5, but what you can do instead is use the pad in conjunction with one of the two accent buttons. For example, that's the basic note. If I hold down accent 1 and play the note at the same time, it's louder. Accent 2, and then that's quieter than the original. And by holding them both down with the note, we get another third level of volume, which is probably all you need, to be honest, when it comes to programming a unit of this type. So it's very, very flexible indeed. Tenuto, what does that mean? Well, that's like a sustain function. If you press the button and then hold down a note, it will sustain indefinitely until you release your finger from the tenuto button. Very useful when it comes to playing chords, for example. Let's take G6, tenuto. Release your fingers. It means I can then move to the next chord, whatever it happens to be, very, very quickly, very easily. And staccato is kind of the opposite of that. I can hold down the staccato button, play a chord, and I get a very, very short note. Okay, exactly what you'd expect. So that's the layout of the controls as far as data entry is concerned. As I said, it is also possible to use an external MIDI keyboard to program the unit, and you will find the sounds are velocity sensitive via MIDI. It's also possible to use the guitar as a controlling device, an amazing feature which I'll show you later on in the video. Well, as I said, before you can actually lay down a pattern, you've got to decide which sounds you want to use in that pattern. And that little packet of information is known as the kit. It contains all of the drum assignments as well as the 3 voices you're going to use for tracks 1, 2 and 3. Now, the DR5 actually comes equipped from the factory with 48 preset kits. Just like with the patterns, they've given us a lot of ideas there to work with. I generally prefer to start with one of the preset kits, again, copy it across and then change it to suit my needs. Anyway, how do you see what these kits are? Well, on the front of the unit we have a button dedicated to this called Kit. Hit the Kit button and you will see the kit number starts flashing, and each kit has its own name, just as with the patterns and the songs. I can use the data device to scroll through the various kits, and as you can see there, we've got some imaginatively titled kits, Pop 3, Pop 2, and so on. Each of these kits containing a different range of sounds. If I keep scrolling through, you'll see we get to 48, and then we'll go into the user memory area, U00, and we've actually got 16 user memory locations, so you can fill those with your own customized kits. First of all, select the kit. I'm going to go for kit preset 00, which is the heavy rock kit. If I then hit the shift erase button together with the pad button, I'm now looking at the instruments contained within each track. Using the track select button, just as we did earlier, we can step through and see the instrument names assigned to each track. So for example, on track 1 here I have heavy guitar. On track 2 I have fingered bass 1. Track 3, heavy guitar again. Now, you'll notice there's nothing flashing on the display, and that generally means that there's nothing you can change. If there's a user editable parameter, it will generally flash. So what I want to do is start with a kit that's roughly what I want and copy it across to the user memory location. So to copy it, we first come back out to the kit name display, obviously by hitting kit again. Preset kit 00 is flashing. I then go shift, copy. And it asks me if I want to copy kit to user location U00. Well, I've got something in there already, so I'm going to go for user location U01. Hit enter. Are you sure? Done. Okay, so that's how we actually copy the kit across. Well, let's go to user location 1 and see that it's there. Back a bit, there we go. Heavy. Well, that was our original kit. If I now go and have a look at the sounds on each track, you'll find that they will flash, which means I can change them. Okay, well, let's start by hitting Shift Erase and Pad. Okay, well, the track select window shows me that I'm actually looking at the drum assignments. Instrument, bass, slide. Well, the drum track actually differs from the other musical tracks in that I can assign a different sound to each pad. So if I start by playing some of the pads, you can see that the actual pad number changes as I hit the different pads, as well as the name of the sound assigned to that particular pad. So let's go back, and in the bottom left-hand corner here we have my bass drum. Okay, and it says solid K. Well, I can change that, and I've got a choice of sort of 20 bass drums. I can actually scroll through and find a different one. Ooh, that's quite a nice sound. Again, hit the snare. I can change that. That's a nice one. Okay, and I can go through the whole kit, all 32 pads worth, and actually change the sounds on each pad. Once that's done, once I'm happy with that, I can hit the track select button, and I'm looking now at the instrument name for track 1, heavy guitar. Well, I want to change that. I want to make that slap bass, for example. I generally put the bass on track 1. Track select, we're on track 2 now. I can change that to maybe a sawtooth sound, for example. And again, track 3, a fantasy pad sort of sound. Okay? And that's the kit. That would be the kit as I want it for my song. I don't have to actually write that into memory. That's now stored. Any changes you make are automatically put into memory. Okay? So we can come out of kit mode. Let's go back into pattern mode. Shift pattern. And we're ready to record our pattern. Okay, so now we're ready to actually get down and record the pattern. I've already created the kit that I want to use for this pattern, and I'll call that up in just a minute. But let's first of all select a blank memory slot. Go to the unit. I'm going to select pattern 302. Now, I've already prepared this by writing the name, but that's all I've done. So the next thing I need to do is actually set the time signature for the pattern. To find this particular page, you use the cursor controls, and we go one step to the right. And you can see there that the time signature flashes, and we have a time signature of 16/4. In musical terms, that may seem a little bit odd, but what it in fact means is we've got 4 bars of 4/4. So therefore giving us a 4-bar pattern, which will be repeated as we're recording. Okay? I like to work with a 4-bar phrase, basically. We have other time signatures with different denominations. You can do some very weird and wonderful things. But we'll set that back to 16/4. Okay? Come back to the main name page. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hit the red record button. It actually says real stroke step because there are 2 ways of entering data into the DR5. But if we just hit it once, you can see there that we have a little flashing semi-quaver. That's our quantize. Now before I talk about quantize, there's just one other thing we must do before we do anything else, and that is make sure that we have selected the kit that we're going to use for the pattern, because the kit will only be remembered as having gone with that particular pattern if it is selected at this point. So you have to be in record ready mode in order for the kit selection to be memorized. Okay? So I go to the kit button, make sure I've selected the correct kit. Well, I'm using kit user 00, which I actually prepared earlier, so that's correct. I can move away and come back just to make sure that Unit has recorded that kit selection. Hit the exit button and I'm back to my record ready display. Okay, now the quantize resolution, this is an interesting concept. Some people will be aware of what this all means. If I'm playing data in real time into the unit, my timing may be slightly off. Well, by setting a quantize, I can actually get the unit to pull my note on positions into a fixed time reference. Now I've selected a semiquaver here, which means that my bar will be broken down into 16 different parts. If I play a note which happens to fall somewhere between 2 of those time divisions, it will get pulled one of two ways. Okay? So depending on how fast you're playing or how complex the material you're putting in is, you'll want to select the quantize accordingly. If you were putting in some slow strings, very, very sparse chords, you may want to set the quantize to be much lower, maybe a crotchet, something like that. But I find it's best to leave it on semi-quaver. Okay? If I now hit the start button, you can hear there the metronome. The start button itself has a little red flashing LED above it. Now, at the beginning of the pattern, which in this case is 4 bars long, I will get a slightly different metronome click, so it's worth listening out for that. Okay, let's just hit stop there. What I want to do first is actually record the drums. So I go to my track select button, move along until I hit drums. Yep, we've got some drums there. Okay, so we're ready to start recording now. I've actually reduced the tempo slightly just to make things a bit easier for me. Hit the start button and we should be ready to go. Putting down the bass drum and the snare drum. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. And automatically there it starts to loop in memory for the duration of the 4-bar pattern. I can now overdub the hi-hats. Again, looping happily. Now without stopping, I can change tracks and go and overdub the bass part. Coming along nicely. Again, change tracks. We've now got a pad sound. Finally, track 3. So there's the pattern. I'm now going to hit the tempo button and bring it back up to the tempo that I need for this song. Let's have another listen. Okay, so we've recorded our pattern. There may be some problems with the pattern, there may be some tidying up. And if you've made a mistake, it's a simple matter to erase the track that you happen to have made the mistake on. You hold down the Shift Erase button while pressing a pad that happens to have that sound on it. That's simple, but you may want to get involved in some slightly more detailed editing. Well, for that purpose, there's a function called Step Edit. You can get to the Step Edit mode by hitting the Record button twice. So let's just do that. I've selected my pattern, 302. Now you'll see on the display here we have our quantize resolution flashing as normal, but underneath we see something quite different. PT, well that stands for pitch. If I use these controls here, I can move over and actually change the value of the pitch of the event at that point. Keep going, and I've got the accent control, so I can actually change the accent. And again, I've got the gate time. Now the gate time is just another way of saying duration. So I can actually change the duration of a particular note that I played in the first place. Let's just have a listen to the pattern. If I stop that and then use the forward and reverse buttons, you can actually hear I'm stepping through each event sequentially. So it's a very, very easy matter to actually find an event that happens to be an error and change it in terms of its gate time, its pitch, and its volume with the accent control. So a very quick way of editing. And as you're working, you can actually hear the finished results by just pushing play and modify it in real time. Okay, let me show you what I've done in the meantime. I've actually created 4 other patterns to go with the one I just showed you. Let's start with pattern 301. This is my intro pattern. I'll just play this for you. Very simple. 302 is part 1. This is the pattern I just recorded. 303, okay. That's a kind of middle 8 section. And then I've got the end pattern, which in this case is just a single chord strike together with the cymbal. Okay, so what I need to do now is go into song mode and piece these all together. So let's shift arrays, song, and the mode display will obviously change to song so we know where we are. Now, we've come to the demo song again here, so what I'll do is I'll change the song I've selected to a blank song memory. Let's pick 10 for argument's sake. Okay, we're now ready to actually piece it all together. Now, to do this, first thing we do is hit the real step record button, and we do it twice, because I'm going to go into step right mode for song creation. Okay, you can see on the display here we have 001 question mark PTN flashing. Okay, what does this all mean? Well, the actual song itself is built up from parts. Now, a part isn't necessarily a pattern. A part is an instruction. Now, I could start the song with part 1 as pattern 1, and I could repeat it so many times, then I could change to another pattern. Each part is a specific piece of information. So I could start here by saying, okay, part 1, pattern, cursor to the right, and we select pattern 301, all the way to the top, which was my intro pattern. Okay, that's what I want. I'm going to hit enter. It immediately then moves on to part 2 and says, what do you want in part 2? Well, let's select pattern 302. Hit enter. Part 3, pattern 303. Hit enter. Part 4, 304. Enter. Well, that's actually my song, a very short song, granted, but I'm going to hit exit now. Okay, so let's have a listen to the song. Okay, well that's pretty much there, but I do feel that the central part should be made twice as long. So what I really want to do here is insert the second pattern at the point where the second pattern plays, so in fact we get twice as long of pattern number 2. So what I can do is, using the forward and backward buttons, find the actual locate point that I need. So let's go back into record mode, select part 2, shift copy, and I get insert pattern, in this case 302. Well, that happens to be the correct number. I could actually change that and insert another intro pattern, but I want 302. So I hit enter. Are you sure? Done. Okay, exit. Let's have another listen to the song. That's a much better length. Now, not only can I insert patterns, but I can also insert other instructions, if you like. Let's go back to that insert page, record, shift copy, insert. Well, you see there it's saying, do you want to insert pattern 303? PTN is flashing, which, as we've seen, means that it's probably changeable. Using the alpha dial, I see there I've got various other options. Well, one of them is TRN. Now that's transpose. I have the option at this stage to insert a part, that part being a transpose operation. Okay? So not every part is necessarily a pattern. It could be a repeat mark, it could be a transpose, it could even be a track level change command. But I'm going to actually transpose up 1 semitone at that point. Hit enter. Are you sure? Done. Okay, let's exit and have a listen to the finished song. So there we have it, the song is complete. You have 20 song memories. Now, should you run out of space, it may be necessary to erase some of the songs you've done previously. To do that, it's, again, using the delete function. Select the song you want to erase, Shift, Delete, and it asks you if you want to clear the song. Hit Enter. If you're sure, press it again. And there, it's gone. Now the DR5 has, as I said earlier, 20 song memories. It also has 200 user pattern memories. You may find that you run out of space eventually, and there is a very useful facility for getting around this problem. It's known as the bulk dump facility, and it utilizes the MIDI out socket on the rear of the DR5. Now, if you own such a thing as a sequencer, a MIDI sequencer, you can dump this information straight onto an ordinary track on the sequencer as though it was standard song data. Store that information on a disk and replay it at any time to load up that set of songs, patterns that you had at the time you did the dump. So, often a very useful way of archiving your work. And here's how you do it. Shift Erase MIDI. So we're going into the MIDI mode, and you'll find MIDI comes up on the mode indicator. Using the cursor controls, we're going to go all the way along to the right. And we see sysx 10. Well, you don't have to worry about changing that. It defaults to 10. That just means that's the unit number of the machine. Sync internal, dump all. Okay, this is what we're looking for. A MIDI bulk dump. We're ready now, upon hitting the Enter button, to transmit all of the internal settings of the DR5 to our MIDI sequencer. Over here, I'm using the MC50 microcomposer from Roland. Now, this is particularly suited to the task as it will record anything you throw at it. So I'm actually going to use that to record the system-exclusive MIDI data on. Okay, well, hit Enter. The display asks me if I'm sure. Hit it again, and it says, transmitting system all. Now, don't worry. If you want to try this, you're not going to actually damage any of the internal memory. You won't lose anything. Although it's transmitting data, it's actually producing a copy of the internal data. So you can record all of that on your sequencer, reload it at any time, but you're not actually going to lose anything from the machine at this point. And that will take about 25 bars at 120 BPM on your sequencer, or about 20 seconds. Okay, so that's the MIDI side of the DR5. Obviously, there's an awful lot more to talk about as far as hooking up to external MIDI modules, synchronization, and so on is concerned. But that's a very important feature, worth bearing in mind. Okay, so the foot switch socket on the rear of the unit, what does it consist of? Well, it's actually a stereo jack input. This means that you can use one foot switch or two. If you happen to have a stereo jack to 2 mono jack Y lead splitter, you can actually route these two leads to separate foot switches. I'm actually using the Boss FS5U foot switches here, particularly well suited to the job. They're actually momentary action, so they're non-latching switches, and you can assign a different function to each of the foot switches. And this is all done within the utility mode on the DR5. So let's take a quick look at that. If we go Shift Util for utility, we can see that the first thing that appears on the display there is foot 1 SS. Well, I can tell you that that means start and stop. So foot switch number 1 out of 2 is going to do my start-stop. If we scroll along, we can see foot 2, and in this case it says reset. So what I've got here, I've got one foot switch set to start and stop, and the other foot switch set to reset, or rewind if you like. So I can start and stop a pattern or a song. Once stopped, I can then take it back to the beginning and start again. I personally find those to be the two most useful functions to assign we have a whole lot of other functions to choose from, a list of 36 different things, in fact. Things such as go to variation pattern, pattern select, data increment, decrement, and so on. So let me just show you this in operation. I'm going to go and select the song. I'll just hold up the pedals. Okay, according to my settings, we've got start and stop over here, and reset over here. So I can take that back to the beginning, start and stop. So that's the foot switch. Okay, well, we've seen earlier how guitarist-friendly the DR5 is in the layout of the pads and so on. Now, as I showed you earlier, there is in fact a guitar input on the back of the DR5. And this is for a very special function. So we're now going to move on and look at how the guitar can be integrated into the system. Okay, well, I've got my axe back. I'm plugging the guitar straight into the back of the DR5 using the guitar input jack. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, the DR5 actually incorporates a guitar amplifier simulator. This is a fab idea because it means you can basically gig the DR5 with your guitar and not worry about carting your amplifier around. Now, the unit will actually simulate the sound of a mic'd up amplifier. Let me just show you how to get into the guitar input mode. If we go to the front panel again, we hold down the shift button and push GTR in, you can see there, suddenly we get GTR in and bypass is flashing. Well, at the moment, that means that the guitar signal is going to go straight through the DR5 and the sound won't be changed at all. It will simply be mixed with the outputs of the DR5. Let's see what else we've got here. Mix off. Well, that mutes the guitar so that none of the sound will actually be sent through the DR5. And there's amp sim. Well, that's the amp simulator, and that's what we want. So, play a bit of guitar. Okay, that's not a dry sound. I'm actually using the Boss ME10 as my multi-effects processor. You may want to use some pedals or some kind of reverb or chorus unit. It's probably a good idea, as the sound as it comes out, although amp simulated, is nevertheless completely dry in terms of effects. So we're ready now to sort of play over the song we just created. So let's go back into song mode and select the song. That's the one. So we're ready to go. Now, the DR5 actually incorporates a very, very unique function, a function you'll not find on any other product on the market at the moment. It is, in fact, a pitch tracker. Now, what this allows the unit to do is take an input from the guitar, track the notes that are played on the guitar, and use those notes as a way of entering data into a pattern. Now, the limitations are that you can only play one note at a time. But that's great. I mean, it's ideal for putting bass parts in, even playing the drums. Let me show you what I mean. If we select a pattern, I've got one pattern here, number 292. Let's have a quick listen to that. Okay, well that's a pattern without bass. I'm going to put some bass onto that, but I'm actually going to play the bass from the guitar. So bear in mind that the sound you hear will not be the guitar at all. It will be a synth sound from the DR5, but using the guitar as the input device. So let's try it. Well, just before we record, we've actually got to go and turn this function on because it's off by default. So let's go to the front panel, Shift Erase, EXT Pitch, that's external pitch. And we can see there that we're flashing off. So we can use the data dial, turn the function on, then go back to pattern mode, Shift Pattern. Okay, hit the record button, hit start. Get ready to play the bass, make sure your volume's up on the guitar. That should now loop in memory. You can hear the bass there revolving around. So, what a great feature. Fantastic way of programming the DR5. Unique to the DR5, you won't find that on any other products. Well, I think that covers just about everything you're going to need to know in order to get up and running with the DR5. There are other topics we could explore, various things which are in fact covered in the owner's manual. So check that out. And what more can I say other than have hours of fun programming the DR5, and thanks for watching.